Um, so we were both very new Christians at that point. And we had a pretty long courtship. We met in 67 or 68. We didn't get married until 1973. And he went off to the army for a couple years, and I went to grad school, and eventually we concluded the Lord was putting us together, and we got married.
What year was this?
We were married in 1973.
Okay, I just graduated from high school, so you're a couple of years ahead of me.
Yeah, I graduated in 65. So,
Okay,
you know, we laugh. Statistically, we aren't supposed to be married anymore. They have statistics for different things that put stresses on marriage and what the percentage is that ends in divorce. And we had a special needs child. And when a marriage has to deal with that, it often ends in divorce. We went through a period of great financial pressure when Bill had his own business and was struggling to keep it afloat. And then and that's another element that puts a lot of pressure on a marriage, and statistically, many of them fail. And then when a spouse encounters a serious illness, which happened to us 16 or 17 years ago when I was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and it was non-malignant, but it required a couple of surgeries and a long journey of recovery, and it necessitated a new normal. We're still living with that new normal.
right, okay.
So we laugh that statistically we shouldn't be married.
Yeah, and that's probably pretty accurate. All those three things that you talked about there really puts a marriage through the ringer. And most people can't handle that. I'm glad you guys did, and I'm sure it wasn't on your own. I'm sure God had to be in the middle of all of that.
Well, when at the time we were married, congregational singing, I don't think was typical in a wedding service, but we wanted congregational singing of the hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness, as part of our marriage ceremony. And
wow.
So we had that congregational hymn, and that's still our song, so to speak.
So does that mean at the wedding itself, everybody in the congregation that came that day sang?
Yes. Yes.
Wow. I'm a wedding photographer, I was, till I became disabled, but I don't think I ever encountered that. I don't think I ever encountered the congregation singing.
No, because typically the wedding is not designed to be a worship service. It's a wedding. But we wanted very much to make a statement with our wedding, and that was part of it.
Right. Very good. That's interesting. Okay, keep on going there.
Let's see, what else?
So you got married, 73. Where did you guys, did you stay in the town that you got married in? Or did you move away? And how did all that come about? And what was your progression through your travels?
We were married in Boulder. He was still going to school. And we stayed in Boulder for the next several years. After he graduated and got his first job, we moved from Boulder to Arvada, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver. And see, what year would that have been? 73. Well, we actually moved to Arvada in 77 when our first child was born.
Wow,
And, but up till then, we had lived in Boulder, and he commuted to Denver to work. But we bought a home the year that Tim was born and, moved. And I left my career. I was never a career woman. But I was working on the staff of, First Presbyterian Church in Boulder, working with children's Christian education. And probably the biggest thing that those years taught me, was the importance of children's early development, and a very high respect for what a mom does raising kids. So Bill and I were in agreement that I was going to be a full-time mom. So I quit work and was mom. Although over the next few years, our younger son was born 3 years later. And from the time Tim was a baby, I did volunteer stuff in the church, mostly in the church. Sometimes I think I volunteered so much that I might as well have been employed.
yeah.
But I
Yeah.
did have a certain amount of flexibility, and I was volunteering. No, actually, I had a position with a very small stipend, working with the children's division at the Denver area's Sunday school convention. And I went to the first staff meeting for that with Tim in an infant carrier. He was, I think, barely a month old. So
Okay.
I got an early start on the volunteering. But mostly I enjoyed being mom. I love those years with my kids.
Okay.
That was a very special time of my life.
Before we got on our program here, you were telling me Tim lives in another state and he is getting a CT scan today.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
I think for his privacy, I probably shouldn't toss it out on the podcast. But
Okay,
they're in an uncertain health time, and we're waiting to see what kind of thing they might be facing, or if everything's all clear.
right.
Um,
And as most people know on our podcast, mom and dads, when one of their children are sick, it affects them very much. Especially the mom, it really goes to her heart and soul. And I think that you pray very fervently for your son and their family too. And I know my wife does also. It's interesting. And before I go further here, I just want to tell people, my wife and I, when Rhonda was going through those 3 points, we probably were part of all 3 of those things. And we did end up in a divorce twice with each other. And she was raising a child for 2 of those periods of time. Me, besides our boys, we had 3 boys. And I eventually had to go through a 12-step program and learn to deal with my anger issues. We are going to do a podcast with my 2 cousins in about 2 weeks on anger issues that affect men and that affect our whole family. So that one will be easy, and I invite people to come and be a part of that. But okay, I didn't mean to take over there. So what was your favorite place to live in at that time?
Well, I guess our first house in Arvada was probably my favorite. We stayed there. Um, we lived about 10 years in that house, and then we moved to Arizona via a short stay in Utah, and then came on down here. As far as okay, I'll take that back. Arvada wasn't the favorite. I liked the house in Arvada. It was just an ordinary little ranch house, tract house, whatever. But I love Arizona because I love the climate. I would rather hide from the heat in July than from the cold in February. And I think Arizona is beautiful. So I guess Arizona would be my favorite place finally.
Yeah, that's real different than Colorado and all the snow and the cold. I know what that's like. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, and I just got fed up with dealing with the winters, and all the snow. So I understand what you're talking about.
Well, Colorado really weren't that bad. It would snow, then it would warm up and it would all melt and fine. It didn't stick around forever. And we'd have cold snaps sometimes when you'd have very low temperature for some period of time. But typically the winters there were fairly moderate. But they were long enough for me. So.
Got it. So I'm sure one of the, because you and Bill had been Christians and were searching for God before you got married, and then it was a big part of your ceremony and your lives. I think as we go through life, there are certain touchstone periods that really explain a lot of who we are and what's going on in our lives. I'm sure when you moved, one of your main concerns was finding a good church. Did you find that to be true? And did you have to search long in the different places you went?
Yes, it was true. I don't think we searched very long. I don't remember whether we visited very many churches in Arvada or not. We were Presbyterians, and our denominational loyalties are very flexible. We don't really care much about the denomination. We're looking at the individual church. But we got started at a small Presbyterian church in Arvada, and we stayed there. Oh, I guess we bought into, and I don't buy into it as much now. It's still very much part of the system, but we bought into children needing their own church space. And the church where I had worked, we had a program for children all day, all morning long on Sunday. They didn't go to church with their parents. They had children's church. And we wanted that, I think partly, probably mostly for our convenience as parents.
Right.
Because taking our child to church and keeping him entertained and occupied through a whole adult service wasn't high on my list of favorite things to do. So we switched at the time that Tim would have had to start going to church with us. We switched to a different church that had the children in their own area. I am not convinced anymore that that is the best plan. I think there's a great disadvantage often in families being separated in church as much as they are.
Okay.
There's plenty of room for argument on both sides. I know folks who have never come to Christian faith because their experience sitting in church with their parents as children was so miserable that they don't want anything more to do with church.
Oh, boy.
So you said arguments on both sides.
That hits me, square in the eyes. I was raised a Catholic and I remember having to sit through, we were a very dysfunctional Catholic family. And, one thing I do remember is the hypocrisy, and especially in my own family. On the way to church, my mom and dad would fight, and we'd get to church, and then they would put on a different persona, that we were like the greatest. And then on the way home from church, they would fight. And I just know that when I got out of the house, I didn't want anything to do with Christianity. I was an atheist till I was 30. And that was one of the reasons. The other reason was I was kind of abused by the Catholic nuns. So God took me on a journey, as he does us all. You know?
Mhm.
So before I go too far, I just, under my name, I participate in a science group of other Christian people that are in there, and it's part of Hugh Ross and his RTB, Reasons to Believe. And Rhonda's in there, and her husband Bill actually MC or is the host of RTB Arizona. You can find this on Facebook. We got on the 24th of this month, we're going to have a very interesting meeting with a guest speaker coming in. And we talk about everything under the sun when it comes to science and how it relates with our Christian faith. So that's right there, if you'd like to see that, Science Group, RTB, Arizona, Reasons to Believe. And I'm going to have Rhonda in a minute here. I'm going to have her change her from her book to the location of her website. She does have a website, and it's very interesting. It's got a lot of poems, explanations, and all kinds of stuff. So, so you finished up. So now you're in Arizona, and do you go to a Presbyterian church here in the Valley?
No. When we moved down here, for years, we went to a large non-denominational church. Then we, it makes me sad, that there's so much division in the church over music. But
Oh, yeah.
the church we are going to currently, I love for a variety of reasons. And the first thing that brought us there in a sense, it's a quieter service. They have a worship team. They've done away with choir, as so many churches have. They have a worship team, but their sound system is a normal sound system. It's not amped out the roof. The drummer doesn't make your body vibrate. And also probably the more important than the music, our pastor makes corporate prayer a major part of the service.
Oh, very good.
He brings up needs, sometimes needs around the world, sometimes needs in our community. One of the things that he does very regularly is he will call members of the congregation up to come up front with him, who he knows are going through something, trials, difficulties, or are experiencing a really wonderful time. And he'll bring them up front. They'll talk a little bit about what it is that's going on in their lives. And then he prays over them. And the whole congregation is involved in that praying. And when we were still quite new to the church, my husband had told him about the volunteering we do with an outreach ministry to international students at Arizona State University. And he was intrigued by that ministry. And he asked Bill if we would come up front one Sunday, talk a little bit about that ministry. And then he prayed over us. And later on, it was neat. It made people aware of that ministry. Another couple in the church said, we want to know more about this. Tell us about this. I don't know whether they're ever going to go for volunteering in it, but certainly they are aware of it. And when you're aware of something, it crosses your mind and you pray for it often. And so there are some more people who are aware of that ministry, probably pray for it at least occasionally. And that one particular Sunday, our whole congregation set that ministry in front of the Lord and prayed for it. And I love that we do that in church.
The international students, is that the same building off campus that we meet in for our RTV?
Yes,
Or is that, okay,
we use the same building.
okay, yeah, that's where I met Rhonda and her husband. I have to tell you about RTV, Reasons to Believe. I struggled when I became a Christian. I was a real believer in evolution and a lot of things in science. And I was really struggling because dealing with Genesis and being different because of evolution says that you don't need a God. So I struggled for a couple of years. And when I connected with the nationwide RTV and with Hugh Ross, it helped me to give me a foundation for my Christian belief. Also, that science and religion were compatible, for Christianity and science were compatible. I eventually jettisoned my belief in evolution because I realized a lot of scientists today are saying that they no longer believe in evolution. But I am what they call an old earther, and a lot of people in our group are old earthers, which means that we believe that the universe is 13.8 billion years old, and we believe in the Big Bang, and so on and so forth, because there is a schism in the Christian church where either you're an old earther or a young earther, and the young earther says that the universe and Earth is only 9,000 years old. And I just knew that that was not possible. So that's where I come from. And that's this group, RTV, I think saved my spiritual life. It helped me to reconcile the Bible with science. And I know a lot of the people in our group of RTV, the local one, Arizona, believes the same way. So that has helped me. I just wanted to give that little piece of information right there because I know it's a big part of your life also. We meet once a month and they meet in this little church off campus at ASU. And they have a Zoom set up there. So if you can't make it in person, that you can actually be a part of the Zoom class. So what do you think about RTV, the local one? Just a short little thing here because I know it's a big part of your life and Bill's life too.
Well, we're very grateful. We're grateful to meet other believers where we hold that common conviction about the consistency between the Bible and Christian faith and science. We're grateful for that. We are eager. I think I see the RTV meetings mostly as a time of training believers to more effectively communicate their faith. We haven't gotten good at reaching out to people who have not come to faith at all. And we desire to do that and keep looking for ways. But equipping Christians to defend their faith more effectively, especially to people who find science is a stumbling block for them. They say, hey, I can't believe Jesus. This isn't scientific, doesn't work with science. And I often describe Reasons to Believe as a missions organization whose people group is scientists. They are missions. They talk a lot about the people group that they are going to. And RTB's people group is scientists, engineers, tech people. So that's often how I describe it. If I'm trying to tell someone who doesn't know anything about it, that's how I describe it. So
Right. The leader of the national group is an astrophysicist by the name of Hugh Ross. And to read his articles and some of the other scientists that write stuff from time to time is absolutely amazing. Because a lot of people have the misconception that there is a stumbling block between religious faith and science, and there really isn't. There is not a stumbling block there. So thank you for doing that. And Bill comes up with, in our local group, a lot of interesting topics to talk about, and then he puts it out there for us to, does anybody have a topic to talk about? So we all get to participate in it. We all get to be a part of that. So it's a big deal because there are a lot of people in the world that have science as a stumbling block for them. But when you hear the reasons, and they talk about the three major reasons that you can prove there's a God. Number one's the Big Bang. Fine tuning of the universe is anything was just slightly off, we wouldn't exist. And then DNA is the other one that has so much information packed in. These three things, if there was not an intelligent designer behind them, and we call it God, but it's an intelligent designer, there was not one behind these three things, then who did it? Like in the Big Bang, who pulled the trigger when it started at one specific point in time? I don't want to go too far here. I'd rather talk about with Rhonda and her marriage. And at some point here, I want you to talk about a little bit about your poetry and so on and so forth. So you remember where we were at? We were talking about the church that you go to. You know, what was interesting earlier, you said they had a thing that was saying thing that separates Christians from their church. And I had to find out, like number 3 or 4 was nobody could get along on about the carpet in the church. So that caused a lot of friction. And I was like, really? What are you looking down for when you should be put together? Anyways, I find it interesting. As Christians, we do find a lot of ways to separate ourselves from other Christians. It's the human condition. It's very sad.
we are sinful creatures, very much in need of God's intervention. And he
Well,
gave
that's
it.
for sure. And he did?
He gave it. In Christ on the cross, the barrier is taken care of.
Did you find at any point going to a church that you you and Bill had to talk about it and say, hey, we need to go to a different church. Did that ever come up in your marriage?
Well, the first time that we changed, which was over children's ministry, and that we talked about going to a different church. I think we've changed churches a couple of times. And I think each time we'd been batting the idea around, but hadn't had a serious conversation about it. And then circumstances transpired that took us into new situations. And I get only once we decided we were changing and went searching for a new church. And at that time, we spent a couple of months visiting different churches before we settled on one. So that's the only time that I remember that we just sat down and said, hey, we really need to change churches. The other times that we have changed, it's just been kind of a gradual transition away from the one we were in into a new one, if that makes any sense.
Oh, yeah. A lot of things happen in churches. They're very fluid. They can change a pastor, and the new pastor could really turn a lot of people off. The way he does prayer, the way he looks at the world, sometimes just irks people the wrong way. And so that kind of stuff happens, you know. Sometimes there's sin in a church, in the higher echelons with the pastor, assistant pastors, things that just people cannot deal with. I know that happened one time with us too, when we changed churches real rapidly because of the sin that came out, and it was almost as if they were having a tough time repenting. They didn't want to lose their position in the community. So it happens, like you said. I think there's a lot of things that go through history and things like that we have to deal with. And we got to remember we're dealing with humans and not God. So we've got to really hang on for dear life and ask God to help us. Earlier, you were talking about prayer and talking. The last month, Rhonda talked about prayer in the podcast. And if you get a chance, go back and find it and listen to it. She had me really think about very powerfully how to think about how to pray and the perspective on that. I don't think we can ever get enough perspective from different born-again Christians that are really on fire for Jesus on how to pray, how to communicate with the creator of the universe. And I just find that very powerful. And she wrote a couple of poems on that subject itself, on prayer. Do you and Bill have a strong prayer life with each other? Or do you guys kind of do a prayer life separately? Or both?
We pray separately. He has, from his earliest years as a Christian, been very private about his prayer life, and he wasn't real comfortable praying aloud with other people, including me. So for a long time, our prayer lives were definitely separate. And then somewhere along the line, well, probably we got involved with the prayer ministry at one of the churches where we went. And that was a wonderful growing time, especially for Bill, because it broke down some of the discomfort of praying with other people. I was already comfortable with being in prayer groups. But for him, that time broke down a lot of the barriers. And we have for years read the Bible together daily. We use a guide from Scripture Union called Encounter with God. And take our readings from that, and there's always a little bit of commentary. And it's not just one little verse and commentary. It's they do a book over a period of weeks. So you go through that whole book and you read a section every day, and then there's some fairly significant commentary. So it's a fairly serious study. And then we've been praying daily using material from the Voice of the Martyrs prayer calendar.
Mhm.
That's a new thing this year for us. And I don't know how many years ago now, we started setting aside time Sunday afternoon to do the Sunday Bible reading and spend prayer time as a family. So we have a weekly prayer time as a family.
I see.
And then right now we have the daily prayer time using the Voice of the Martyrs prayer request, and we address that briefly, and we don't spend a long time praying, but we use that particular prayer prompt. And I'm not very disciplined, and as I think I mentioned in the last podcast, I don't spend long periods of time in intense prayer. I start praying about the time I wake up in the morning, and I think I pray all day. Whatever comes to mind, I pray about it. And of course, there's the family scripture time. We always have that. I've found that for me, I may go several days without doing any, I don't do a quiet time.
Okay.
And I read an article a while back that Christians need to get rid of this whole idea of quiet time. And I don't remember where that article was, but I thought, well, maybe there's somebody else in my corner on that. But I find that I'll sit down and read a large portion of scripture at one time. And then the next day I'll come back and I'll read that portion again. And I may read the same portion over and over and over for several days running. Then I'll start breaking it down into shorter sections to chew on a little more. And then when I reach a point where I'm satisfied with what I've done with that, I may go my merry way and not do anything at all for a few days, other than the family study. So I'm not very disciplined. I am erratic.
Yeah, me too.
And God in his mercy isn't beating on me about it. So I'm grateful.
Yeah, his message is coming out of you as it should. I'm not real disciplined either. My wife, I hesitate to say that is, and she kind of jumps on me from time to time. But we do talk about everything in our culture that's going on. We talk about the chaos that's going on, and that we both believe that Jesus' second coming is not too far away because of many different reasons, a lot of things that are going on today. There's so much chaos that's going on, and it can be very scary for a lot of people that are sitting there that don't have a belief, because we realize that no matter what's going on, God is still in control. But it's hard to always, you have to remind yourself of that. So now tell us how your marriage has changed. What are some of the friction points in your marriage that are different than they were when you first got married? And before you think about that for a moment, but I have to say that I used to be a very private prayer person, but then I realized, and someone told me that you need to pray in public, because a lot of people don't know how to pray. And when you do it in front of other people, they go, a lot of times they go, oh, it's just like talking to another person, like talking to God. So that's why I'm still uncomfortable about it, because I feel like I'm going to stumble over words. I won't have the right words to say. And sometimes I just draw a blank. And I have to ask God, help me to pray, help me to say the right words, because I am not good at this. But I want to make sure that people understand, and from my exhibition of praying, that they get it, and that's how they can pray also. I finally got it when I first became a Christian, and I saw other Christians praying. I was like, oh, it's just like talking to a human, only deeper, so that's, so go ahead and answer that question. Did that give you enough time to think about it?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was a very great friction point, well, it wasn't a friction point that we argued over, but it created a lot of difficulty for me, especially early in our marriage, or during the child rearing years, from the time our older son was just a couple of years old, and for all the way through probably, well, into high school. Bill traveled a lot for his business, and he was gone a lot.
Okay.
And, that was for me a very lonely time. Sometimes I would think, I might as well be a single mom. Now that wasn't true. And I had sense enough finally to say, no, you are not a single mom. Just because he's gone a lot, you still have, I had all the benefits of his providing support for the family, providing a home for us. He was doing all sorts of things that a husband is supposed to do. And walking away from that would have been absolutely foolhardy. But now he's semi-retired. He keeps dabbling in some business and science areas, or computer science areas, but he's not fully employed anymore. And we have the privilege of living a much less busy life than we had for a long time. So the biggest friction point just isn't there anymore. So I think that would be probably the biggest change, is that an area that was friction for a long, long time is simply gone. It's not there anymore.
I think what happens too, and this is, I think, affects women more than it does men, because men, we're busy with work and our brains are always active and functioning in other areas. But sometimes with women, their imagination can get beyond them and think all kinds of odd thoughts, or the enemy can get in there and really fill her mind up with a lot of stuff. And if she doesn't have a good prayer life and really connect with God, and ask for that protection, that shroud of protection around her and her mind, I think, I know this happened with us. My wife would think all kinds of strange things that she thought I was thinking or I was acting out or whatever, and they weren't true. So she had to put a lid on that. And a lot of times we can't do this by ourselves. We need God to intercede in there and help us to really concentrate and focus on what is true and what is a lie. Because after all, Satan is the father of lies, and he will try to really put all kinds of strange, oddball thoughts in our minds, and then we obsess over it. And I think that kind of attacks women even more so, especially in the areas of marriage. So do you think that is a true statement, what I said, or do you think I was off a little bit?
Well, it probably depends a lot on the individual. I don't think I wasn't fantasizing, if you will, on what Bill might be thinking or doing. I never, ever had a question about fidelity. That was certain. I had no question about that at all. And I think it was mostly the loneliness that got so difficult for me to deal with, and that made me feel like, why be married? And I knew what the Bible said about marriage. I took it very seriously. And I knew that divorce wasn't what God wanted. Both Bill and I were convinced of his desire for permanence in the marriage. And I can remember some weeks that he would be away, and he'd be gone over the weekend too. And I sang in the church choir. So I'd get the boys and me to church, and I'd be singing in choir. And this frustration with my marriage would be running through my head. And what if I left? What if I just left? What if I just called it quits? And I would pray, standing up there in choir, Lord, please, would you take these thoughts away? Just help me to put these thoughts away from me. And eventually he did. I said, no, divorce would not solve anything. I'd still have all the problems that are inherent in me. I'd have all the complications of family life springing from breaking up the marriage. And God says this is what he wanted. So finally, I said, no more to those thoughts. That is not an option. And I think I have a very vivid memory. I think Tim, our older child, was probably about 7 when this occurred. I was tucking him into bed one night, and if he was 7, we would have been married 10 or 11 years at that point. But he just asked me in the most matter-of-fact tone of voice, he said, Mom, when are you and Dad getting divorced?
Wow.
He was seeing that happening to his friends.
Oh, boy.
He was perceptive enough to see that his parents weren't always really, really happy with each other. And he just said, when are you getting divorced?
So what did that do to your heart?
Well,
He said that.
It made me sad, but I didn't have to stop and think about it. I said, we're not. Because that was, at that point, I had settled in my mind that I wasn't leaving. I wasn't going anywhere. I was committed to staying in this marriage. So I just said, we're not. And he said, just as matter of factly, oh.
Yeah.
And that was the end of that discussion.
Out of the mouth of babes, right? But you answered it in the way it should be. Very good. As we've been talking here, I want to leave enough room to talk about your poetry. But as we talk about it, there's a lot of things that break up marriages too: pornography, sexualization of things outside the marriage, all kinds of things. And I belong to a 12-step group. There is a major group that meets, and I'm going to try to start a podcast with maybe one of those people, and it has to do with pornography. And they talk about there is a real problem in the Christian church with pastors and assistant pastors and men that are part of the church that actually look at pornography and follow pornography in a big way. So they have started a ministry dealing with this. So I know you probably guys didn't have to deal with that, but it really affects a lot of Christians as well as non-Christians because it's so accessible now today, more so than it ever has been. And it's been affecting men and women, which shocked me when I heard about that. And I had to talk to my wife about that, about pornography with women. And I was blown away by it. Anyways, before we go too far, Rhonda, can you tell me what your title is or what your subtitle of your website is?
The title is poetmonk.com. And
Right.
then I think I Weave a Song of Praise is in there somewhere. That's the title of my book. Do I have a subtitle? I'm not sure.
I think subtitle is just Poet Monk. How did you come up with that name anyway?
Well, I have been a poet for a lot of years. And in the year or so after my brain surgeries, I spent a lot of time close to home. And I guess shortly before that, I had read an article, I think in Christianity Today, I think it was sometime in the year or so before I was diagnosed with brain tumor. I had read a portion in Christianity Today about a Protestant monastic movement. And it was a group, they're called Prayer Foundation. And as I understand it, I think there is a community of people, I believe they're in Oregon, living together. Now it's not, they are trying to live their lives around a rhythm of prayer.
I see.
Around a rhythm of prayer. A married couple started it. I think they have some single people involved in the little community that they're in. But there's no, you've got to be celibate. As far as I know, there's not even a vow of poverty. I don't know. I haven't gotten acquainted with how they run their community, but they have a website with many, many resources about prayer. And I had at least heard about that. And then sometime in the first couple of months after my surgeries, I stumbled across it again and began to read some of their material. And thought,
What is the name of, again, we only have 2 minutes here,
okay,
or a minute and a half. What is the name of their group?
Prayer Foundation.
Prayer Foundation.
If you search for them, you can find them.
Okay, what I'm going to do, because I know we're short on time, you can see Rhonda's website right below my name right there, thebondmonk.com. Go there. I'm going to be posting up the blog that she wrote for this podcast. And I will find Prayer Foundation and do a hyperlink into that. I haven't posted this blog yet, but I will be doing it later today. So I want to, Rhonda, we've got to cut it short here. I'm going to finish up here by thank you everyone who was here with us. Our next episode of Judge Christ Talks will be aired in July when Rhonda will be back with us. Be sure to subscribe to our channel or page where you found us and check out our website to find out more about this and other shows. Thank you again, Rhonda. We came right down to it. So see you next month.
Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.